So, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on the ACER revised draft proposal on the demand response network code. We're here today to guide you through this network code, which is part of our consultation process. And we have a number of presentations. The team will present on the work that has been done on this network code. So maybe some introductory remark from my side. So my name is Mathieu Frans. I'm team leader in the electricity department of ACER and leading the team that is responsible for this piece of work. So these new rules, they aim at enabling market access for demand response, including load storage and distributed generation, aggregated or not, as well as facilitating the market-based procurement of services needed by distribution and transmission system operators. So following this legal requirement, ACER has significantly revised the EU DSO and ENTSO-E proposal, which was submitted on the 8th of May to us. These revisions are there to ensure its compliance with the framework guideline, its contribution to the objective of the regulation of the existing regulation, and to improve the legal text. Apart from the network code, EU DSO Entity and ENTSO-E propose also amendments to the existing legal framework to ensure consistency with the new provisions. And some of these amendments were proposed jointly by the two entities, while ENTSO-E proposed some additional amendments. ACER has assessed the proposed amendments and has revised the regulations. But we also invite stakeholders to express their views on the potential different structure of the parts in the existing regulations through the general questions of the survey. So for the planning and the process, ACER is following for the revision recommendation in this draft network code. So, as said, in May, we received the EU DSO and ENTSO-E proposal to submit to ACER. And in the meantime, ACER has worked on revisions of the proposal. From 5th of December to the 31st of October, we were holding this public consultation, of which this public workshop today is a part. In the period of November to December, ACER will process the public consultation comments and will indeed also continue exchanges with stakeholder committee through the already formed drafting committee that was used in the previous part of the process. Then in January, we'll follow the orientation discussion between ACER and NRAs and the finalization of the recommendation towards the commission, which indeed then will be finalized in a ACER Board of Regulator meeting in the course of February-March with its subsequent submission to the Commission. The guiding principles we use for the revisions of this draft network code are the following. So first, we want to ensure a legally consistent draft. We've been working on improving the drafting quality with some amendments on the wording, the structure, and the clarity of the legal requirements. Then we are looking into ensuring compliance with the framework guideline. Some of the requirements of the draft framework, the demand response draft, were not fulfilled in the formal proposal. And then finally, the content direction. So the direction in the demand response network code within the boundaries of the framework guideline and respecting the objectives of the existing regulation. In order to achieve this, indeed, ACER has significantly revised the proposal that we received from the entities. But we also see that further revisions are still required. And this is also why ACER is seeking the early input of the stakeholders in this process to ensure adequate time for processing all the comments and indeed also give stakeholders the chance to really shape the final proposal through the involvement of the drafting committee. What is the focus for us in this network code? That is mainly on enabling market participation. So the effective market participation of small system users in all markets, meaning we want to put in clearer requirements to implement the aggregation models, ensure a European registry for baselining methodologies, among others. Next to that, easier access to balancing and local markets. So product verification and simpler, shorter pre-qualification, if applicable, for indeed those local services when they're procured by system operators. And on top of that, a flexibility information system that allows to combine all the information on those actors in one place. Then a transparent process to ensure those local markets can be set up. So meaning market-based procurement of local services by default, and indeed deviation to non-market-based procedures if it's justified. And then indeed some clear requirements on the interaction between those different types of markets in the electricity system. And then final, ensuring the overall efficient operation between the different system operators, so TSO and DSO, and DSO-DSO coordination for identifying and solving congestion and voltage control issues. So I would pass the floor to Athena, and I'll give her the word on the first topic today. Thank you. Good luck, Athena.
Thank you, Matthew. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Today's workshop is about explaining a bit further the revisions that we made to the proposal by the entities, but of course we cannot cover all the topics in these 2 hours that we have. So we try to provide clarifications on the main revisions to provide you with a bit of background info on the reasoning that would help you better go through the network code and the revisions that we made. So starting with a topic that is overarching in the network code. It is related to the national and European processes for the development and approval of terms and conditions or methodologies. So first of all, we have the set of articles related to the national process for the approval of national terms and conditions. Unlike the other network codes and guidelines, in this one, we have also an additional requirement at national level for the establishment of a process for bringing together system operators, DSO and DSOs, for jointly developing common proposals, the proposals that are required in this network code, and then also the approval process by the NRA. Similarly to this, we have also the European process. First of all, for the joint development of common proposals by ENTSO-E and EU DSO entity for European methodologies, and then their subsequent approval by ACER. It is important to mention that in this network code and the amendments that we've done also to balancing, all the European methodologies are methodologies which further specify and harmonize the national terms and conditions. So there is always this link. Whenever we have an approval of a European methodology, this needs to go back and trigger the development of an amendment of the national terms and conditions and the subsequent approval at national level. This is important. This is the framework that provides us with the possibility of further harmonizing in the future all these topics that we have now covered by the new rules that we present here. So how this future process would look like. In order to make sure that we follow the implementation, we have 2 separate processes. One, it's the ENTSO-E and EU DSO entity report on demand response. This is a monitoring report on specific topics that are included in the network code, and they are listed in the provisions here. And in parallel, we have also the ACER process, which is the general obligation for ACER to monitor the implementation of network codes and guidelines. So as part of this general obligation, we have also the monitoring of the implementation of the provisions included in this network code. These two parallel exercises will result into identifying needs for further harmonization in the future, and also will help us to define best practices together with the stakeholders. In this process, we would see then the output of this process to be input in the development of European methodologies, proposals first by ENTSO-E and EU DSO entity, and subsequent approval by ACER. And this would then be repeated in order to achieve the further harmonization when this is needed in the future. Regarding the market access and mainly Title 3 of the Network Code, Title 2, sorry, of the Network Code and the amendments in the balancing regulation, the major areas, with the major amendments are aggregation models, the calculation of injections and withdrawals, baselining, and minimum bid quantity and granularity, which is only applicable for standard balancing products. All the elements described in these in the subsequent slides and in these parts of the revisions aim at providing clear rules for the implementation of the aggregation models and correct allocation of balance responsibility. This is very important, as I will explain in the next slides. More transparency in the use of baselining methods, and easier access to balancing markets for small resources. Going into the provisions related to aggregation models and balance responsibility, it is important when reading and when discussing about aggregation models to have in mind this general responsibility given to all market participants in the context of the electricity regulation, which is that each market participant is responsible for the imbalances that goes in the system. So they should either be a balance responsible party or contractually delegate this responsibility to another balance responsible party. What is this responsibility? At the end, it is related to the market that each participant is engaged to, and this means by participant meaning either someone who is only active in day-ahead and intraday, or a supplier, or a service provider. All of these are market participants and have balance responsibility. Of course, there are a lot of combinations, but the aim is to make sure that that balance responsibility is not only something relevant for service providers or suppliers. This responsibility is linked to the obligation that market participants have to ensure that whatever their market position is, this is reflected also in their physical injections and withdrawals. So the physical injections and withdrawals assigned to them. This means that when it comes to allocated volume, we need to take into account calculation based on measurements or profiles. And this is the two aspects that need to be balanced for every market participant. However, in this equation, an additional element comes for the service providers. So we have also the element of imbalance adjustment. And this is the energy activated by system operators for balancing, for local services, or for other purposes. This is how we have it reflected now in the balancing regulation. This imbalance adjustment is important to have in mind that from the definition of this concept is only linked to the BRP, to the balance responsible party of the service provider. This is only where this imbalance adjustment is applicable. So we have this general equation, which is binding for every, let's say, market participant. And in this sense, it is also relevant for market participants engaged in aggregation. However, when we want to make sure that market participants engaged in aggregation are fully captured by the whole concept of the imbalance settlement, we need to go into adding some components that would allow further corrections related either to the allocated volume. So when there is a need to correct the allocated volume aspect, or when this is more related to the final position. So the correction is applied on the market aspect of the market participants calculation. In this sense, and depending on the aggregation model implemented, when a correction is applied in the final position, we also, because this correction in the final position resembles more like a trade, since the market aspect of it is amended, we also foresee a financial transfer that should accompany this change in the volume, so this change in the final position. And this is the financial transfer. Again, this is only linked to the implemented aggregation model. So as long as the chosen model is one that includes correction in the final position, then we have also the financial transfer. But on top of that, and independently of the financial transfer implementation, there is also the financial compensation, which is an option that the member states have to implement on top of the financial transfer. And by on top, we also mean that costs that have been covered by the financial transfer are not should not be included in the financial compensation. Moving to the concept of the calculation of injections and withdrawals, we've already seen that this is very relevant for balance responsible parties, for BRPs, and thus for every market participant, because every market participant is a BRP. However, measurement, so the calculation of injections and withdrawals, is also relevant in another case, in the case of the service providers. So in this case, if the activated volume, the activated by the system operator volume, is calculated on the basis of the metered values and not the requested values, then the whole calculation of injections and withdrawals becomes relevant also for the service providers. In this case, in the network code, we try to refrain from differentiating between the source of this metered data, as long as these metered data are validated within the context of the national validation framework, and they are of the required granularity. So we don't distinguish in the provisions where the data come from, as long as they are validated and they are fit for the purpose, meaning the granularity either of the service, of the provided service, or of the imbalance settlement period. When we are dealing with injections and withdrawals, we also have another concept, which is the baselining. In this sense, we understand the dual role of the baselining when implemented. One is more linked to the provision of demand response. So whenever we have activation of demand response, we understand that there should be a baseline against which it is measured. And the second is the allocation of volume to multiple balance responsible parties when such allocation is needed based on the implemented aggregation model. For the baselines, we have not gone beyond the proposal by the system operators in terms of harmonization. So what we have kept is this notion of the EU registry with all the baselining methods. The concept or the reasoning for that is that we consider the existence of a lot of baselines also as easier access for service providers. So we didn't want to restrict their participation through specific baselines. And we also understand that there is room also for innovation in the future. So the idea is more to provide transparency on the methodologies that are being used rather than restricting the use to some specific ones. Now, as already mentioned, the provisions related to aggregation models and imbalance settlement are all moved in the balancing regulation. However, all the provisions related to measurements and baselining have been kept in the network code. although they are very relevant, as we said, for imbalance settlement through the calculation of injections and withdrawals. We follow this approach because, as explained at the beginning, measurements and baselines are also relevant for the provision of the service from service providers' perspective. So for now, we have kept it in the network code, but we are still unsure where they should be better placed. And this is also something that we would like to have your feedback in the context of the public consultation. Moving to the next topic regarding the minimum bid quantity and granularity. This is, as mentioned, only applicable to standard balancing products. So in the proposal by ENTSO-E and the DSO entity, there was already the reduction of granularity for these standard balancing energy bids and capacity bids to 1 decimal starting from the minimum bid. The minimum bid is 1 megawatt. So what we have in our proposal now for consultation, for public consultation, is that we reduce, apart from the granularity, also the minimum bid size to 0.1 megawatt. However, we consider that the reduction of bid granularity proposed by the system operators is already an important step for facilitating the participation of aggregators. And we would very much welcome your input in the public consultation on how important you see the reduction of the minimum bid size to be as well, I mean, together with a minimum bid granularity, or whether you consider that this is something that could be left also for the future. That would be all for the market access, so I will give the floor now to my colleague Christina.
Thank you, Athena, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm taking control of the slides. Okay, so we start now with this second part of the presentation that focuses on Title 3 of the Network Code. And these are the areas where we've made major amendments. In particular, we will cover during this presentation the default process to qualify SPUs and SPGs, so service providing units and service providing groups, and where a deviation or repetition of the qualification process would be possible. Secondly, we will also see our major amendments regarding the simplifications and exemptions when product qualification applies. Thirdly, we will refer to the total duration of the prequalification process. And last but not least, we will see the major amendments regarding the flexibility information system. One relevant aspect to mention is that, as also explained in the whereas of the Network Code, we clarified that this title, Title 3 of the Network Code, covers balancing and local services that are procured in accordance with a market-based mechanism. So this would mean that the system operation regulation would then be applicable only to the qualification processes for non-market-based balancing services. So if we move now to the first area, so to the qualification of SPUs and SPGs, on this regard, we proposed product verification as the default process for all products. So this extends the scope of this product verification compared to the system operator's proposal, because the system operator's proposal didn't define a unique and common prequalification process for standard balancing products as required in the framework guideline. Nevertheless, in this product verification, the system operators, as part of the terms and conditions for service providers, can propose for NRA's approval the verification criteria that has to be met in a maximum time frame, and also the way forward when the result of this product verification is negative. Now the point is in which cases a deviation from product verification to product prequalification is possible. Well, this can be proposed by the system operators, although it has to be subject to NRA's approval in the following cases. For balancing products, if the capacity of the potential SPU or SPG is higher than 500 kilowatts, or where the potential SPU or SPG has to deliver a specific balancing product that is designed to be activated when the system is in alert state or emergency state. In the case of congestion management and voltage control products, if the capacity of the potential SPU or SPG is higher than a threshold that would be set at national level as part of the terms and conditions for service providers, and applicable to all products, this deviation would also be possible if the potential SPU or SPG is allocated to a service provider that has not successfully passed a product verification for the same product, and consequently it's being suspended. The system operator's proposal included additional deviation criteria to go from the product verification to the product prequalification, but as part of our amendments, we decided to remove some of these deviation criteria, mainly because in some cases they were not sufficiently clear, or in other cases they were not sufficiently justified. In addition, the system operator's proposal also included that all TSOs have to develop a proposal for a European methodology to harmonize the qualification of BSPs and the pre-qualification of reserve providing units and reserve providing groups for standard balancing products. We have kept this European methodology, but we have shortened the deadline to submit this proposal, because as mentioned before, this was a requirement in the framework guideline that should have been defined as part of this network code. If we move now to in which cases the product verification or the product prequalification could be repeated, the cases would be these ones shown on the right, and they could be proposed by the system operators, but again, they are subject to the NRA's approval. In particular, we have these two cases. The first one is if the prequalified or verified capacity of the SPU or SPG is modified in more than 10% or 3 megawatts, whichever is lower compared to the previous product prequalification or product verification. And the second case is if the service provider changes the communication system of the for SPU or SPG control. Regarding these cases, also the system operator's proposal included additional repetition criteria, but we decided not to keep them in this version for public consultation, because some of these criteria we consider that were implicitly or are implicitly included in one of these two, or in other cases, some of the repetition criteria were not sufficiently clear. With these amendments regarding the default process and the cases where a repetition would be possible, we think that with these amendments we ensure less restrictive market access, especially for smaller units. Also, the benefits of deviating towards market prequalification are subject to NRA's approval. And last but not least, we also try to achieve a harmonization of the product prequalification for standard balancing products as soon as possible, and of course, when applicable, so when this deviation is approved. If we move now to the second area, we focus on those products where the NRA has approved a product prequalification instead of a product verification. For these cases, we have widened the scope of the simplifications. So first of all, these simplifications we consider that should apply when potential SPU or SPG exclusively consist of small controllable units. Also, when the controllable units are identical to controllable units being part of other SPU or SPG previously prequalified by any kind of service provider, or if we are in a situation where we have a combination of these two, so an SPG that would have a combination of small controllable units or controllable units that are identical to other prequalified controllable units in prequalified SPUs or SPGs. For these cases, the procuring system operator should simplify the evaluation, so where it checks whether the technical characteristics of the SPU or SPG meet the corresponding product requirements, And the procuring system operator should also include some kind of simplification in the activation test if required. And last but not least, in our amendments, we have also included that these simplifications would apply to all situations. So this would include also a first-time product prequalification of an SPU or SPG, or also when there is a switching of controllable units and a product prequalification is required after this switching. Regarding the exemptions, we have removed the exemptions for central dispatching models. In particular, there were some exemptions in the system operator's proposal regarding that the product prequalification would apply to all products for central dispatching models, or there would be unconditional activation tests for these dispatching models. And with these amendments, we consider that if product prequalification applies, so if this deviation has been approved by the NRA, we consider that the process would become less burdensome and costly for small and or identical controllable units, and a level playing field in market access would be achieved regardless of the type of dispatching model in place, while ensuring system security and market functioning. Moving now to the third area where we have made major amendments. This area refers to the total duration of the prequalification process when this prequalification process applies. So to better understand our amendments, here we try to show an overview of the different parts of the process. So as you know, when a service provider aims to qualify an SPU or an SPG, the first part of the process is the application process, no? In this application process, we have removed the intermediate deadlines for these different steps shown here in the slide, because we consider that these intermediate steps and intermediate deadlines is something that should be set by system operators at national level. Regarding the second part of the process, here is where we can have two different situations. One is when the product verification applies, and in this case, the relevant SPU or SPG would get a temporary qualification to start the service delivery, and the procuring system operator would check whether the verification criteria are met in the maximum time frame in order to get the final qualification. But we can also be in this second situation where product prequalification apply. And in this product prequalification, we know that the procuring system operator would perform an evaluation to check if the technical characteristics of the SPU or SPG meet the corresponding product requirements. And as part of this evaluation, the procuring system operator may require an activation test upon the fulfillment of some requirements set out in the terms and conditions for service providers. So now, taking into account this overview, our main amendments had the aim to ensure that the total duration of the prequalification process is as short as possible, and it has to be defined in the terms and conditions for service providers, but very importantly, it has to respect the requirements set out in Article 12.1 of the Electricity Directive. And also very importantly, this total duration of the prequalification also needs to be taken into account when this product prequalification is required as part of a switching process of controllable units between service providers. Also, this total duration must be respected when defining the duration of the grid prequalification when applicable. So with these amendments, the result would be that the prequalification process would never prolong beyond 3 weeks, also if this process is required after switching controllable units between service providers. This way, we consider that the requirement would be in line with Article 12.1 of the Electricity Directive. And at least with these amendments, system operators would have the freedom to set the intermediate deadlines of the application process, the product prequalification and grid prequalification when they apply, while always respecting this total duration. And if we move now to the last area with the major amendments in this Title 3, this refers to the flexibility information system. And in particular, our amendments have focused on three elements. First of all, we've tried to ensure at least the minimum processes and corresponding data exchange procedures that have to be simplified or streamlined through this information system. And this would cover the qualification of the service provider, the product prequalification and product verification of the SPUs or SPGs, grid prequalification of SPUs, SPGs or parts of SPGs, temporary limits when they are set by the system operators, and switching of controllable units. Then, of course, if at national level is decided that other process should be simplified or streamlined through this flexibility information system, this is something that it's up to each member state. But at least these minimum processes and their corresponding data exchange procedures should be part of this system. Secondly, our amendments have also tried to ensure that system operators propose a stepwise implementation process at national level to define and implement this single flexibility information system and also to implement the relevant data exchange procedures until ensuring full interoperability. And this has to be done not later than 4 years after the entry into force of this network code. As already included in the system operator's proposal, each member state has to set up a single national system, and this is something that can be centralized or decentralized. But with our amendments, we have also tried to ensure that it's up to each member state to decide on the architecture of this flexibility information system. So it can be a registry, but it can be any other kind of architecture. So it could be a tool, a platform, and so on. And thirdly, with our amendments, we have also tried to clarify the provisions on the responsibilities for access, register, administer, and update information in this flexibility information system. So the service provider would be responsible for the SP and SPU, SPG data, but the system user, who would be in the end the owner of the controllable units, by default we have set up that it would be responsible for the controllable unit data. With these amendments, what we try to achieve is less burdensome processes for both service providers and system operators. And we also try to ensure that there is coordination in all these processes between the procuring system operators. So now I give the floor back to Matthew to start with the Q&A session.
Thank you, Christina, Tina, on this introduction of the first topics. I already see a lot of activity in the Slido, so we'll go to that quickly. And as you also see, we have a bit of extra time for that. Maybe first, which I forgot to mention in the beginning. So in the Slido, there's also a number of general polls we want to ask you parallel to the session. So a lot of you have already found it. Was a message in the chat as well, but we really invite you to answer that. At a certain point in time, I need to close this question and continue to the next, but I'll leave this first question open during the Q&A session. So you're welcome to answer it. So Tina, I think I would go to you for the first set of questions, which were labeled as general questions, which is indeed a bit about the process and the aspects around the general development of the network code. So first, Paul Giesbers asked a question: would it not be better to first analyze current national practices and find best practices before to draft a new EU code? Because this code will not result in any harmonization. So any answer to that first question.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Indeed, that was something that we had to answer already in the framework guideline, I would say. So how far we should go with prescribing or harmonizing on a topic that is not really there yet. So, I mean, it has not arrived at the point where we all understand what are the best practices. We all agree on that, and then it is only a matter of implementing them. Already in the framework guideline, the messages we received from experts on several topics was that, at least for some of them, we need to leave room for innovation, for testing further solutions. And this is why we took this approach of providing room for further harmonization in the future. However, we also understood that there was not even a common ground in a lot of topics that we could build upon to reach this harmonization. And this is why one of the main achievements of this network code, the provisions in general we are discussing today, is to create this common ground through common processes, common terms, and roles and responsibilities. So it is about putting the first layer in the aspects where we identify the need for harmonization. Already now we include it, but we see more in the future for further harmonization. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Then maybe the second question is when will the interactions with the drafting committee between November, December be announced? Is there already concrete steps planned? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. We will try to communicate that rather early, but there's not a clear timeline yet. It will be towards the end of November in any case, but we will communicate to the drafting committee members the exact steps for following this process, so that you're also aware of that.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Tina. So now I go to the questions, and there's a number of them, and there's some very popular ones. So I'll just start with the most popular first, which is maybe a bit of a short question. I don't know if you already had an answer, but is how should we understand the meaning of validated metering data?
Yes, so in our discussions, it was very crucial to see how we take into our requirements the data coming from dedicated measurement devices. According to the EMD, we have at national level, there should be a national validation framework for data coming out of these devices. So this validated, meaning the ones that have passed this national process through the national validation framework. That's the intention.
Okay, thank you. I see some questions popping for the first place, so I'll just take the one that is currently on the first place. This is on a question on slide 18 on the data exchange requirements refer to static/master data. And the burdensome part for aggregation is differing APIs and communication protocols. Why did ACER remove Article 33B to standardize data exchange? I don't know, by the way, if this is more a Christina question or an Athena question.
I will take it. Thanks.
Okay.
So indeed, that was reading the article. We understand that the intention maybe to further standardize was not achieved through the article. So one aspect was that the article didn't really deliver the standardization that it, could be achieved. The second aspect, and the main one, is that this data standardization, according to our understanding, if it is to happen at European level, then it should be part of one of the methodologies to be developed or the implementing acts. So at the level of the network code, we try to cover the principles, the processes, but then if we need to standardize data in the context of a specific process, be it pre-qualification or activation or settlement, then we need to go to the specific European methodology that would harmonize that and add the provisions there, the provisions that we consider to be relevant for that after we make the assessment on the possibility of having standardized data in the context of this process. So we do have that in the European methodologies. We cannot have something additional in the network code level.
Thank you, Athena. Next question is on the financial compensation mechanisms. It states member states should foster the demand response participation in all markets, and if they define a financial compensation mechanism, it must not create a barrier to demand response and aggregators. Is it your intention to complete the code so as to clarify how member states can prove they do not create such barrier?
There's no intention to further to add something in the network code in this respect. Also because this comes from an obligation of the directive. It is national responsibility to respect that. There's not much that can be added in a network code level with respect to proving how this has been implemented. However, we will have the monitoring tools to monitor the implementation of all these aspects at national level. And then in the context of the European discussion within the European stakeholder forums for demand response, we will have the chance to check best practices or distortive implementations.
Good. Thank you. I have another one which refers to Denmark. So in Denmark, under market model 3.0, aggregators can aggregate units across different BRPs and don't have a one-to-one relation between an aggregator and a BRP. How is this handled?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think that this is why it's important also to have this network code to start using the same terms and ask and replying questions in a way that we understand each other. By across different BRPs, I would assume that you mean across different suppliers, let's say. In this sense, one-to-one relationship between aggregation and BRP, it's not one-to-one in the sense that an aggregator may have multiple BRPs for different bids that it submits. If this is the meaning, then there's no problem with handling that. The balancing regulation and the imbalance settlement already covers that. If something else is meant, so if aggregator BRP is the BRP of the aggregator, then it is covered. If you mean something else, please also add something in the question and I will try to reply it in written. So if by BRP you mean supplier or something else.
Thanks, Athena. I think I'll give you one more question and I'll then move to the qualification topic. So this question is, compensation is in many EU member states a barrier for independent aggregation development. Would you consider defining it in a way to facilitate demand response growth and for all member states to follow? What's your opinion about the UK approach to compensation?
Thanks. So we will not define further the compensation in the sense of putting the formula or explicitly stating which costs should be taken into account or, I mean, restricting in any way further to what is there in the network code. The problem is that we see the possibility, depending on the aggregation model that has been implemented, to have part of this compensation already implemented within the aggregation model. This is why it is more about monitoring what has been done and through identifying best practices in the future to see if there is room for further restricting or for following a specific approach. I'm not familiar with the UK one, so I won't comment on that. Okay.
Thank you, Athena. So I would now go to the qualification chapter. Indeed, also start with the top scoring one. So indeed, a number of questions. The first question, Christina, is why to make product pre-qualification under the conditions we defined subject to NRA approval, preventing harmonization of the rules again? I think EU harmonization meant here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this question. Well, in the end, I mean, it's going to be subject to the NRA's approval because by default, there would be a product verification for all products. And if system operators want to deviate from this default process, this would be as part of the proposed terms and conditions. Terms and conditions that will be then approved by the NRAs. So in the end, I mean, this is something that is going to be approved by the NRAs. It's going to be, because it's going to be a part of the terms and conditions for service providers. The only difference in our amendments compared to the system operators proposal is that when we include the different repetition criteria or deviation criteria, I mean, since we are still in a situation where, I mean, all of this is new, I mean, the product verification is new and so on, at least as an intermediate step, the different cases proposed in the network code allowed NRAs to see if the proposal of the system operators to deviate is not sufficiently justified, and they see that still this deviation may not be beneficial, the NRA would still have the possibility to reject this proposal. So this is the only difference compared to the system operators proposal. I hope this clarifies.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. The next question I have high up on the list is, what's the justification for the product pre-qualification thresholds? And then it says why 10%/3 megawatts. I hope you understand what it refers to.
Yes, yeah, they refer to the cases where a repetition of the product prequalification or product verification would be allowed by system operators. These thresholds, the 10% and the 3 megawatts, is not something proposed by or amended by ACER. It was something that was already included in the proposal by the system operators. We didn't make any kind of change to this threshold because we understood that they have been sufficiently discussed as part of the drafting committee, and also taking into account input from the stakeholders. So that's why we decided not to make any kind of amendment. Regarding the, I mean, sorry, only one more thing. Regarding, so if the attendants have more questions or more doubts regarding the reasons why is this threshold and not another one, I would also invite them to check the supporting document provided by ENTSO-E and the EU DSO entity that also clarifies more on this regard.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question I have is, what does it mean for a system user to be responsible for data? And so if the data is inaccurate, they are at fault. Oh, I see it's moving down now, but let's take it first.
Thank you for the question. I mean, since the system user is going to be the owner of this, I mean, of the data of the controllable units, we consider that by default they should be responsible for providing this data. In the end, they are going to have a contractual relationship with the service providers. So if this data is not accurate, this is something that should be part of this contractual relationship between them too. So it's the responsibility, let's say, of the service provider to make sure that the data provided by the system user is accurate when it's provided in the flexibility information system. Matthew, I think you are muted.
Oops, sorry. Last question from my side. I see we have another minute, so I'll take one question more. So the highest scoring one is the pre-qualification re-verification provisions previously allowed for previous test results to be reused for the components of the SPG that haven't changed. This was a very important provision as it prevents needless cost and inconvenience to customers. Why was this removed?
Okay, on this regard, I think we will double check because I think with the current amendments, I mean, the current amendments don't prevent this to be taken into account for the re-prequalification or re-verification, but I will double check and reply in written.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. So I think we're right on time to continue, and we took a bit of extra time for the Q&As. I think that was appreciated. So I think we go to the next slide. I will not take the control. So Christina or Tina,
Yes,
you please move on and take the next part.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, so in this second part of the webinar, we are going to focus on the market-based procurement of local services and the operational coordination between the system operators. And if we move to the areas where we've made major amendments, first we are going to cover the process and the rules for market-based procurement of local services, and also the criteria for applying flexible connection agreements in relation with the local markets. And secondly, we will focus more on the system operators coordination, so in particular in the DSO observability area and in the system operation and coordination. So if we start with the process to procure local services, firstly, our amendments have aimed to ensure a transparent general process applicable to both existing and future local services. And in particular, this process sets out that when local services are the most cost-efficient and effective solution to solve a congestion or voltage issue, they should be procured in accordance with a market-based mechanism to be in line with the electricity regulation and the electricity directive. If one or more system operators want to deviate from this market-based procurement, they can do it, but they have to submit a request and an assessment to the NRA justifying the deviation. And they can do it individually or aggregated. We have included this possibility to do it in an aggregated way because we consider this way we are facilitating the process, especially in member states where there are many DSOs. Then the NRA may approve a derogation. It can be an individual or joint derogation, but it has to provide a duly justification per system operator, grid or area on the reasons to deviate from market-based procurement. And we have also included a provision to ensure that this derogation may also draw different conclusions per area, voltage level, product, system user, or time period. Because this way there is room to approve derogations according to different circumstances instead of having general derogations. Secondly, we have also included other situations that would trigger this process. So in particular, if there is a derogation in place, so if there is no market-based procurement of local services, but the reasons for non-market-based procurement are no longer applicable, or market-based procurement demonstrates to be efficient, for example, because there are some system operators that have tested a local market in a pilot or regulatory demonstrative project, and market-based procurement is demonstrated to be efficient. In these cases, the NRA, at its own initiative or at request by one or more system operators, would request an assessment to the relevant system operator to determine whether it makes sense to extend the existing derogation. So this would prevent situations where non-market-based procurement would be in place, but it wouldn't be justified anymore. And another situation that would trigger the process is if a local market is in place, but it seems to be inefficient. Because, for example, in this local market, there can be a high market concentration, or this local market may create additional internal congestions. For these cases, also the NRA, at its own initiative or at request by one or more system operators, could request an assessment to the relevant system operators to determine whether it makes sense to grant a derogation to deviate from market-based procurement, so to set up non-market-based procurement of these local services. This would then prevent situations of inefficient local markets. So with our amendments, we consider that this process becomes more in line with the clean energy package, because the procurement of local services would be market-based by default, and any kind of derogation would be transparent because it would be based on an assessment that would be made by the relevant system operators who are better placed than the NRAs to make this kind of assessment. And it would also be transparent because it would be duly justified for different areas, grids, or system operators. And we also consider that the derogation could also be tailored to different circumstances. With these amendments, we also think that the process would make easier to set up local markets and allow demand response and other distributed energy resources to really play a role solving congestion and voltage issues. So now I give the floor to my colleague Athena for the rules on market-based procurement of local services.
Thank you, Christina. Okay. For the ones who have already been through the public consultation documents, and especially the note that we published also there, we try to give an overview of all the terms and conditions or methodologies included in the network code. One of them is the national terms and conditions for service providers. And we consider the rules for market-based procurement of local services to be part of the proposal for these national terms and conditions. However, as mentioned, through this network code, we try to further streamline the requirements for these national terms and conditions, and in particular, in this case, for the rules for this market-based procurement of local services. So we have three different groups of requirements related to that. First of all, it's the requirements for the procuring system operator. So everything related to principles that they should follow, processes that they should have in place, and all the tasks related to this market-based procurement of local services. The second aspect is on the coordination and interoperability with other markets. By other markets, we mean both they have an intraday to the extent that the processes take place in parallel or interact, but also other market-based procurements or procurement processes for services, either TSO or DSO services. So this aims more to ensure that there is the necessary coordination so that markets are not distorted, liquidity is not limited. And finally, we have the group of requirements related more to the procurement, pricing, settlement of local services when this market-based procurement is followed. So all the requirements or provisions related to this are only applicable for the cases where system operators implement this market-based procurement. Moving now more to some general principles or requirements that we have included. First of all, we don't have any separate appointment or designation for a local market operator. So all the requirements that we have in this title are by default put on the procuring system operator, so the one who has the need for this service and runs the procurement process. However, we consider that the provisions in Article 16 of the network code related to delegation and assignment provide full flexibility and room to the member states to select the setup that better fits their design. So in cases of member states where, for example, there is only one TSO procuring or DSO procuring local services in a market-based way, perhaps the most efficient solution would be this system operator to also operate the market, and then perhaps some tasks being delegated to a third party. In other member states where we have more market-based procurement processes in place, perhaps a more centralized approach would be deemed more efficient, and in this case, perhaps it would make sense to have the assignment of a third party assuming the role of the market operator. This is left open because we also see that now we are in a place where this is very, it is not that widespread, the market-based procurement for local services, but moving into the future, we need to make sure that there is sufficient room for implementing also different options. However, even when implementing these different options, we need to ensure that there's no fragmentation between the markets. We don't lose liquidity because of parallel procurement processes. And this is why we have the requirement of on the procuring system operator to forward bids, either combined or not, to other markets. So this is to ensure this coordination and to ensure that we don't lose on liquidity. Then we have a requirement that we kept from the system operator's proposal on the locational information to have a common at member state level information, standardized definition and use of this locational information for all system operators with such processes in place. And finally, we have also some additional requirements for the case where third parties take over some tasks. We do consider that Article 16, with the general principles and requirements on delegation and assignment, cover to a large extent also the assumption of these tasks and responsibilities by third parties, but we also have some explicit requirements on top of that. Regarding the benefits that we see implementing these requirements of the network code, first of all, we consider very important the clear allocation of responsibilities for the setup of local markets. We consider that this would make easier the setup of market-based procurement of local services. And secondly, it's the value stacking through this coordination with other markets in order to ensure that service providers also have the possibility of offering energy services to system operators through these processes, but also to other markets. And then I would give the floor to Nikos for the rest of the slides.
Yes, thank you, Athena. I will take control now. So, moving forward on the topic of the interaction between flexible connection agreements and local markets. On this topic, the framework guideline requires that the demand response network code includes provisions to ensure that markets are not distorted when they coexist with flexible connection agreements. In this respect, system operators' proposal included already a requirement for coordinated activation of flexible connection agreements and local products when they coexist to ensure the efficiency of the selection process. Apart from this requirement, which is kept in the text now in public consultation, our main amendments to the system operator's proposal focus on two additional aspects. First, aiming at ensuring that when flexible connection agreements are established, system operators are still required to assess if the associated grid constraints may be addressed more efficiently through the procurement of local services, thus allowing more capacity to be offered as a firm until the network is developed. When network development is deemed not to be the most efficient solution, the Electricity Directive affords the possibility to establish flexible connection agreements as a permanent solution. In these cases, the text foresees an exception to the above requirement to assess the procurement of local services. And the second topic of the proposed amendments focuses on ensuring that if flexible connection agreements restrict a user's ability to participate in balancing or local markets, then such restrictions are imposed solely through the mechanisms of grid prequalification and temporary limits foreseen in the network code. These mechanisms apply to all users in accordance with regulated and transparent processes and criteria that will be established on the national level and are considered to provide adequate framework for system operators to accommodate restrictions also coming from flexible connection agreements. With these amendments, we are aiming to ensure that third-party access requirements of the Electricity Directive are considered, particularly as regards the obligation to provide access to the grid unless when there is insufficient capacity, and also considering the temporary nature of flexible connection agreement. Then to ensure also that solutions based on local markets are not excluded by default if they are more cost efficient. And finally, that users with flexible connection agreements are not unduly restricted from participating in markets for system operator services. Moving then on to operational coordination topics and the DSO observability area, our amendments here focus on the definition and scope of the observability area, on the establishment process and the timeline. With respect to the amendments related to the first area, the definition and the scope, it must be noted first that the framework guideline requires that the demand response network code includes principles for procuring system operators to establish the system operation coordination areas as a group of grid elements, users, connection points that are related to one or more given congestion or voltage issues on their systems. Having said that, the proposal by system operators introduces instead the DSO observability area, which follows a similar concept as the observability area that's established for transmission system operators in accordance with the system operation regulation. This proposal is kept in the text, and the proposed amendments aim to fully clarify it. In particular, the amendments aim to clarify that its DSO is required to establish its observability area not in connection with specific congestion or voltage issues, but to enable an effective oversight over its entire system, including detection and control of such connection or voltage issues in order to maintain secure system operation in general. Then, in addition to that, the proposed amendments aim at ensuring adequate flexibility for the DSO to determine the relevant parts of other systems to be included in the observability area. The purpose of this flexibility is to avoid prescribing exact rules about grid elements, users that need to be included in the observability area in order to avoid overextending and overpopulating this area beyond the connection points with other system, if the DSO can still obtain the necessary information coming from these systems through relatively simpler approaches. The second set of amendments focus on the processes to establish the DSO observability area. In particular, they establish some principles and minimum requirements to ensure that all potentially relevant system operators are transparently involved in the process and that the competent regulatory authority is informed and capable of monitoring the progress. And more importantly, that system operators outside the DSO observability area that may be affected by congestion or voltage issues on the DSO own system or by actions to solve these issues are also determined to enable coordination and data exchange also with these system operators. And then finally, our last amendment shortens the timeline for establishing the DSO observability areas to 6 months following the approval of national terms and conditions for system operators coordination, considering that establishing the DSO observability areas is a prerequisite to enable further coordination. And then moving to the topic of system operation and coordination, which as regards this topic, the framework guideline requires that the network code on demand response includes principles for assigning roles, rights, and responsibilities to system operators for identifying congestion and voltage issues on their systems and for solving these issues through procurement of local services. Against this background, we have clarified and amended also system operators proposal related to the requirements for DSOs to perform analysis on the systems in order to forecast and detect such issues and to identify potential solutions at the various time frames. The amendments first clarify that the minimum time frames for this analysis are to be set at a national level, considering the diversity among different DSOs, and this shall be done through the terms and conditions for system operators coordinations. Then DSOs may establish additional time frames in coordination with system operators in their observability area. And in any case, time frames shall be consistent with DSO operational security analysis time frames and also coordinated with market time frames. In addition to these clarifications, the draft network code requires the text under public consultation at this moment requires that this analysis, when performed at the day ahead, intraday, and balancing time frames, is carried out with a granularity equal to the imbalance settlement period in order to more accurately reflect real-time system conditions. And then finally, the remaining set of amendments aim at clarifying the text that the system operators submitted with respect to the roles and responsibilities of system operators as either procuring or relevant system operators for coordination based on the requirements of the framework guideline. So essentially, procuring system operators, the text establishes that procuring system operators shall be responsible to identify effective and cost-efficient solutions to solve congestion and voltage issues on their systems, and in that sense, procure and activate local services where these services are assessed as the most efficient solutions. In performing these tasks, procuring system operators will need to coordinate and ensure data exchange with relevant system operators in order to enable these operators to assess potential impacts on their system, including the application of the two coordination procedures foreseen in the text, grid prequalification and temporary limits, the results of which procuring operators shall also need to respect. And then moving over to the relevant system operators, the text specifies also system operators proposal includes some requirements for cooperation with procuring system operators in the sense that they should be able to consider technical measures on their own systems, such as grid reconfiguration, to contribute to solving congestion and voltage issues, to facilitate the delivery of balancing and local services from resources connected on their own systems, subject, of course, to grid pre-qualification and temporary limits aiming at ensuring the secure operation of their own systems. And with that, we reach our Q&A session for this second.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you, Christina, Athena, in this second session. I think we're nicely on time, and I also see we have again a range of questions. So I would again take them in the order of the topics, how we treated them, and start with I think a few of general questions that came in a bit late, but I think would be still well valuable to discuss. So to start with the first one, the first general question. Which is a question on the subject of definitions, which is indeed a very general topic. The question is, common elements and harmonization are key. And the question is whether ACER is going to tackle the subject of definitions which are not in sync with the other network codes, because this makes correlation between the codes very difficult.
Yes, indeed. So this is something that we tried to tackle from the very beginning. It's been difficult, especially because of the scope sometimes being different between existing network codes, what we're trying to do with these new rules. But the aim is to have an alignment at the end. So also we see the issue with some of the system operation definitions and terms being used. With balancing, we try to, and we consider that we have covered it. So please, if you identify such issues, let us know also during the public consultation, your input, because our aim is to have aligned definitions across the existing legislation. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Athena. And maybe the second one is a bit related on the scope of the code covering transmission connected generation and not only distributed generation. But I think maybe it's more a question of how we treat the scope in general in this network code.
Yes, so I mean, from our perspective, we consider to cover both. That's why we have also the aggregation models covered in the balancing regulation. This is why we also consider the DSO coordination important in these discussions. So from our perspective, both are covered, pre-qualification the same. If you identify areas where this is not clear or we need to say something additional, please flag that as well. Our intention is to make clear that we cover both.
Okay, thank you. So I would now take the area of market-based procurement of local services. So the first question, and I think maybe the second is a bit related to that, is whether grid users are free to choose where they offer their capacity to the local market or to the wholesale balancing market. And if they only offer their capacity to the local market, for instance, congestion services, can they never be accused of capacity withholding for the other markets? I assume this is meant here, which could be a remit violation. Any answer on this, Tina?
Yeah, they are free to choose who they are contracting with, how they offer their capacity, if it is intraday, if it is local market, if it is for congestion management, balancing. So this is open. I'm not sure if this means some national requirements or some national mandatory participation, but from the European Code perspective, there's no restriction on that. So if the capacity is offered for local services, then this is the market. This is why we have also the forward of bids, so that we make it easier for this participant, if they want their capacity to be offered also in other markets, to be there. But capacity withholding, I would refrain from answering that in a definitive way, as conditions under remit apply. So it depends on the case, I would say.
Okay. Thank you. And maybe indeed then the second link indeed on the forwarding of bids, whether that is only allowed to ensure value stacking or also for other purposes.
Yeah, so as I try to reply, indeed, it's not the only option for value stacking. Market participants or also service providers, they are free to offer their capacity, to offer their energy in any market. The forwarding is only to make it easier for them for the cases where we have parallel markets or in order for them to not to have to take additional steps. But value stacking is ensured by the general requirements of the network.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question is, if a balancing bid is blocked because of a temporary limit, because of congestion, is such a blocking of flexibility not to be regarded as a congestion service? So indeed, I think the application of the temporary limit itself being a congestion service is the question.
That's a nice aspect. I mean, we had this discussion also in the context of the balancing regulation. So indeed, marking a bid as unavailable, how far it goes into the system operation and its connection to a market process. Having that regarded as a congestion service, it is a bit forward thinking, let's say, but indeed, in a liquid market or in a very far future where resources would be available to provide such services in a way that is not harming competition and all that, you would also set up a market in this case. But for now, yeah, it's more the temporary limit.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Then indeed the next question is, what is the definition of a bid? Why does this forwarding of bid should be for local markets while it is not for other markets which are independent, like balancing day ahead and intraday?
Yeah, the main the trigger for that is having the markets in parallel. So for us, this is something similar also to the linking that we have, for example, for different platforms in balancing, exactly because the gate closure time for submitting bids in two different processes is the same. So then you would either have to choose between the two processes and then split the liquidity, or you need to establish some sort of link between the two in order to make sure that you use all the available capacity. So the whole idea behind this forwarding is to make sure that when something happens in parallel or in the same time frame, we are not losing this liquidity. So if something is not used here, it is available in the other market, of course, subject to the consent of the service provider. But that's the idea.
Thank you. Maybe the next question I have, I was doubting whether to ask it to Nikos or to Athina, but maybe you will listen while I read it out. So the question is, who decides on the question of whether the use of local flexibility markets is more cost efficient than the use of flexible connection agreements? Probably more the question for Athina, I assume.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I can start, but Nico, feel free to complement. Yeah, so we understand that this assessment, let's say, takes place in a more long-term time frame. So when the system operators identify that they will have an issue in the future, they need to also identify ways of solving that. So this is more linked to setting up market-based procurement of local services. Whether having a flexible connection agreement or not is a matter of not having any other choice, let's say. So then I would have to offer flexible connection agreements. Now, if these flexible connection agreements are subject to activation, let's say, and if this is what is meant by using the flexible connection agreement, so indeed there we see a merit in assessing the cost of activating one of the services that are available to the system operator through the market-based procurement of services, and activating the cost of using this flexible connection agreement. But then this is, I mean, it is up to the system operator in the sense that there is a methodology for that. So again, it's more about the interaction between the two.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so indeed, the next question is indeed why not to elaborate a few basic use cases with the aim to understand how congestion management and balancing interacts before finalizing this code. The writer has the impression that we're building a house without understanding the foundation.
It's a nice example. I would say that we are not building the house now, we are building the foundation. So that's what we are trying to do now. Indeed, or maybe the first floor or something like that, but we do see that we are not building the whole house now exactly because of that, because we have not concluded on what is the best way for designing, for example, market-based procurement of local services, or what is the best aggregation model for this type of service and all that. So now we are just trying to put the solid and concrete foundations and make sure that we give also the room for building on top of that in the future. But if we don't start now, then we are already too late for the years to come. That's a bit the explanation.
Thank you. Maybe Athena, I would take one or two more of this, and then I'll go to the other topic. But I see we don't have that much question there. But I see we do have a number of questions in the market access in the beginning, so I would take some of them after that. So maybe first, final one or two for the market-based procurement. This one we answered. So the question is, will the assessment of the efficiency of market-based procurement consider the relative efficiency of alternatives? Market-based procurement might not be perfect, have some issues, but it might be more efficient than the alternative.
Yeah, so in this network code, we don't cover this assessment, but we consider that this comes before, so it is part of what Christina described with the whole derogation process, let's say. So the idea is that at member state level, there is the assessment of the efficiency of the market-based procurement, but always together with the other alternatives. So you start with identifying the issue, then you list all the options for addressing that issue in the long term. And if there is nothing more efficient than the so first you would have to assess whether the market-based procurement of local services is efficient for solving this issue. If not, then you would go to the alternatives. But it's also a bit difficult to identify the alternatives as well. So it is very different from case to case. But yeah.
Thank you. And I think I have the last one then, and then I would go to the others. The question is, why do we speak about local market and not about just procurement of local services? Because in many cases, there will only be a congestion in a few hours per year. So obviously, and luckily, there will be nothing happening in the so-called market for most of the time. And then I think I have a reply to that, or an addition, which is interesting to add, that it would be area specific. In my country, you're dealing every day with congestion on both transmission and distribution levels. But I agree, maybe the term local market sounds a bit restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The term that we try to use also in the context of the network code is market-based procurement of local services. Local market, we only use it in the slides when the space is not sufficient, let's say. But indeed, the aim is always to talk about the market-based procurement of local services, because this is what it is at the end. It's more like balancing market is also the market-based procurement of balancing services. But instead of saying all that, we say balancing market. Of course, it's a bit different. Okay.
Good. Good, Nikos. I have one question for you. I must say the TSO-DSO coordination triggers a lot less debate, it seems, or a lot less questions than the other topics. But at least let's have this one. The question is, how can we ensure balancing services are only activated from the assets connected to the network of a TSO in times when there's a congestion? Is there an idea to be more clear and strict about that in the network code?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I fully understand the how exactly the network code will actually be able to provide some principles, let's say, to ensure that, to actually restrict the provision of balancing services. Depending on depending on whether there's congestion in a certain network. So I don't think that we have discussed something like that yet in the network code. So yeah, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Then I would go back and I would take maybe I'll take the unsorted list, and I'll take some questions. I think we have a bit of time, so some questions on the market-based procurement. So first question, this is basically whether independent aggregators should be allowed also in wholesale markets, meaning day ahead, and that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, if the compensation is closely tied to the day ahead price, the independent aggregators probably do not have a business case for day ahead, but would it then be interpreted as a barrier in terms of the electricity directive? And it's 21 votes, so it's an interesting question, I see.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, just to be clear, indeed, the wholesale markets are also balancing. So that's the more general comment. But indeed, independent aggregators are also allowed to day ahead intraday. That's clear. This is why we try also to integrate the implementation of the aggregation models in the imbalance settlement to make sure that we capture everything that happens in all previous time frames, market time frames, up until real time and imbalance settlement. Now, the whole point of the compensation, so in this case, it would be financial transfer. So if you indeed make what was called perimeter correction, or how we call it now, this correction in the final position in order to implement this aggregation model, and you would attach a financial transfer linked to this correction in the final position, then, of course, it is closely related to the price that you will select for the settlement of this volume. Here the question is more on the day-ahead price, but of course, in this discussion on what this price should have been, there are a lot of different views on whether it should also reflect the cost for hedging, or whether it should be more linked to something long-term, or if indeed it should go to a day ahead. I cannot answer whether this would be a barrier or not, because this requires further monitoring, closely checking the specific case and see if indeed it is it does consist a barrier for aggregators. But the aim is also to cover all this through this monitoring, through the close interactions with stakeholders in the coming year. So for now, if it was that straightforward, then we would have a clear requirement also in the regulation, in the network code. But we don't consider that it is something that we can so firmly have as a position.
Thank you, Tina. Maybe then the next question is also a bit on the baseline methods and the numerous projects on that. So I need to question whether we can comment on the numerous projects showing that baseline methods don't work in practice. And then with some additions that all explicit services rely on baseline methodologies, including balancing services that have been out there for decades. So this statement might be a bit too generic, and then indeed added that balancing services use day-ahead schedules and not fictitious baselines. I don't know if you have anything to add to this one.
It is a hot discussion. This is
Yes.
why also we opted for not going for saying something additional to that. We consider that it is important to provide transparency on the baselines that are being used. We do hear the concerns. On the other hand, we see that it is a bit difficult to generalize that on all services and all kinds of demand response. So the idea is to leave that evolving, and closely monitoring it in order to see if there is indeed a reason for concern for specific services, because as mentioned also in the comments, for some services, this is the way it is done so far, and it is difficult to consider another way, at least for the near future. But yes, the idea is to critically think about baselines in the direction of improving them and also substituting them, if possible, with something that makes more sense, is more accurate, or depending on the debate, would be appropriate for specific services.
Thank you. Yeah, so next question I have is on the framework guideline. It was mentioned that an exhaustive list of the different aggregation models would be provided. However, the consultation version only includes a reporting obligation. Is there a specific reason why the exhaustive list was not included?
Yes, so the framework guideline required an exhaustive list of all the types of aggregation models based on the number of BRPs and on the existence of financial compensation. And we consider that we are rather close now to that. Indeed, there's no list, but on the other hand, we have described in an exhaustive way, all the possible ways that an implementation model can be, an aggregation model can be implemented. So we have either the volume the correction in the allocated volume, the correction in the position, and the financial transfer linked to that. There are, of course, models, bilateral models that are not captured by the imbalance settlement, and this is more between the BRPs. But we consider that what we have described, it does allow in an exhaustive way for the implementation of all aggregation models. But agree, we don't have the list in the same way that we had it in the context of the framework guideline.
Thank you, Tina. And it may be linked to this, a question to clarify the concept of financial transfer and compensation you proposed. That the reader considers it not clear from the text.
Yes, thanks for the question. So indeed, it is, we try somehow to distinguish from the general concept of the final compensation described by the directive and given as a possibility to the member states. We try to distinguish the concept of financial transfer, which is a kind of financial compensation, but which, depending on the implemented model, may be a part of the model itself. So when, as part of the aggregation models, we need to make a correction in the final position of the BRPs, this correction in the final position is more seen as a trade, so to say, since we are changing the market schedule. And in this sense, apart from the volume that is being corrected, we understand that there should be also a settlement, a financial settlement together with that. And this is what we call financial transfer. This part is there only to cover the costs for that the supplier had to submit for buying the energy that was then not consumed. And in this sense is part of implementing the specific aggregation model. So this part, we call it financial transfer. We consider it part of the aggregation model, and the financial compensation is something that would go on top of that if there are additional costs identified at member state level that the member state would like to compensate, but not the costs already covered with a financial transfer, which are more linked to the energy bought that was not consumed at the end. I don't know if it is clear still.
Yeah. I think it is. I think I see a question, which I think you answered already, right? On the validated metering data, so I would skip that one. I think I have one last, yeah, I think I'll take one or two questions. One question on the market-based procurement of local services. So the forwarding of bids seems overly complex when trying to establish a new process. Is it the role of aggregators to market the assets where the value will be the highest? So indeed, I think meaning the choice of placing the bids put on the aggregators rather than on those markets operating them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, the idea is to make it easier for market participants and for the markets that somehow overlap or happen in take place in parallel timeframes. But the aim is not to restrict aggregators or market participants in any way. So, I mean, if you see some issues with this provision, or if you consider that something additional needs to be added to clarify that it's not a restriction to market participants, please feel free to propose that also through amendments to the text. Yeah, because the idea from our side is to make it easier for market participants.
Okay, then I see one, and I think you already briefly answered it, but maybe it's good to mention it. So requirements on balancing are clear. Could you please clarify whether parameter correction for imbalances caused to the supplier by flexibility activation applies also to wholesale, as we expect it would?
Exactly, yes. So as I mentioned, indeed, the intention is to include also to allow also this what is called here perimeter correction, what we call correction in the final position, to allow also that for market participants only active in day ahead or intraday. So that's and I see also the reply that balancing markets by definition are not wholesale. I don't know. I have a different understanding of the definition, but okay.
Yeah, I think our understanding is balancing markets being part of wholesale markets, so I think we can be clear about that. So, and I think we have time for one more. I would take a final qualification question for Christina, because Athena has already had so much questions. So this question, Christina, is: do you consider the DSO regulation requirements on reserve dimensioning should be revised to account for the risk of unreliable/contracted reserves not yet verified? How can the DSOs count on non-pre-qualified and non-verified reserves?
Well, I'm not sure what the question refers to. I mean, if they are referring to FCA reserves that have never been pre-qualified. I mean, the question is not fully clear for me. Because it refers to reserves that have never been pre-qualified or verified, right?
I think it's more linked to if we don't have them verified, then they are not reliable. So instead of procuring 200 megawatts, let's say, of balancing capacity, we will procure more. But I don't think that this is the point. I mean, of verification. I mean, ex post verification. It's more about making sure that the you may reduce the capacity that you pre-qualify, but not increase your requirements of the overall balancing capacity that you need? If this is the question, but I don't know if that's the question.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was briefly disconnected. So thank you. I think I would close the Q&A session now. So for those questions that have not been answered, team will answer them in writing in the Slido tool, so you can find the answers there. We'll try to do this as soon as possible after the meeting. Let me go to my final slide and hope this works. It does. So closing remarks. So maybe first, as a lot of you already did, we still have the poll running. Thank you for the answers to the previous questions. We'll leave the final question open on any topics that you think are not covered in the ACER revised draft. So please answer or vote on the topics that have already been mentioned there. It will be open for well, I think at least an hour, so you can also still answer your points and put your points in there. Of course, the whole webinar was indeed there to support you in understanding the current draft of the ACER revised work. We really invite you to submit your input to the consultation in any way you see fit. I think there's a lot of levels you can provide the input in on pure responding to the drafts, but also providing your draft amendments. We would be really happy to take that. Of course, there's still a month until the end of that process, so you have time to dwell on it and to discuss in your internal groups and provide your input, which indeed we would be very welcome to take. I think with this, I would really warmly thank you for joining the webinar today. I think we had a lot of people. I saw over 400 people participating in the webinar, which I think is quite an interesting and of course also overwhelming amount. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you to Athena and the team on the work they've done on this, and we'll hope to receive your inputs into the consultation, and talk soon. Bye bye.